Alrighty folks, welcome back to another video from Yates Computers, Tips and Reviews. So for this video, I started a series on the external drives, what the drives are. Head on over, hit subscribe, hit the bell, come on back over. This one's going to be kind of a really short video because I don't know if anybody really touches on this subject in 2024. About the different size drives. I wanted to let people know today really what the differences are. Because you'll hear a lot of 2.5, 3.5. Nobody really knows. Small laptop drive, just put the SATA drive in. There's quite a bit of variances in drives today. M.2s have 4 to 5 different sizes, how long the board actually is. That is probably not a major factor for a lot of people because if you're going with an NVMe, you got to know what your board supports. You're going to look at your board information. Your board's going to tell you what it supports. If it supports the 2280 full board, if it supports the little mini or whatever it supports. Some of them support a variable, some of them support them all. You can buy an add-on card that you can add the card in that will support it. You plug it into your port on your board, on your PCI port. You can do a lot of different variables with them. But where this one video kind of varies is now we get into the old with kind of the modern tech. It's still valid tech. And you had the old NVMe, IED, all of those type of drives out there that really aren't part of this anymore. If you have IED, it's very old, and probably with Windows 11, your computer won't support it unless you have some weird variety of board that you bought that supports that. So this can still fall into some of that. But what I'm talking about, again, is 2.5 and 3.5. What is it? It's actually the size of the drive. Everybody knows the new modern SATA drives. A lot of people probably still haven't upgraded to this. And you see the little bracket here. 2.5, 3.5. So the smaller drive can fit in the bigger bay or the bigger space. .5 laptop drive is what they were originally called. They were a laptop drive. They were smaller to fit in laptops, portable devices. Today, mostly all devices use this basic size because they're using this drive. And I know it can be a little complicated to understand that. And it can be kind of confusing and a big headache when you go out and you buy this drive and it doesn't fit. It's like, why is this smaller than the spot? This is why. This is what you need is the enclosure to go from 2.5 to 3.5. And I know some people talk about that a little, but I wanted to really focus directly on that. Here is a 3.5 drive. I'm sure everybody knows and has seen these drives. But to understand what this drive actually is and how it relates to this drive, they're the same. They're basically the same. They're SATA drives. It's kind of weird, the different sizes. But usually where the main difference is this one usually can store a lot more data. They're a bigger drive. There's more space in there for more platters and bigger platters for them to store larger data, like 50 terabyte, 36 terabyte. All of that stuff are these. When you get into servers and you get into external drives and all of that type of stuff, usually they're the bigger drives that are in there. You can use these drives and RAID them, stripe them so that multiple drives look as one letter. And you can get more storage space. The interesting factor with these, and I actually have it here on this one, and I've done videos on it, is this enclosure can actually hold 2 drives. So you can get an enclosure that can actually hold 2 drives that would actually go in the bay of that. So if your motherboard does support RAID 1 or RAID 0, you can use this feature if you have the ports, the power cables, and all the other stuff in there. If you go back and watch those other videos, I talk about the rabbit hole, the videos about the ports, the power supplies, all of these type of factors that come in to it. So you can actually put 2 drives into the one bay. So you have that flexibility because maybe if you're a gamer, you want a gamer drive and you want your OS drive. Maybe you want to store your files on one, your folders, your pictures, all of that on one drive, all your games on another drive. You can do that with this kind of enclosure. So this is really some of the craziness when it comes to 3.5, 2.5. And it can kind of get really confusing because some people can throw some stuff out there and you're like, what? Well, wait, like, ooh, because they start talking about, oh, you just put this in there with the 2 drives and not really show you what you're taking out, what is going in, how much space is in there. And one of the key other factors to doing this, to me, that I've brought up a lot of things about is put them on top of each other. Look at this. What do you see? There's space. What is space very important for in a case? There's space. If you have fans blowing in the front of your case near your drive, and you have this big block in there where no airflow can go in around through, it has to go literally around it. What else is around it? You have your power cables, you have your other cables that come out of here. You have, this is in a support bracket that blocks a lot of the airflow. Going to something like this, yes, this drive can get a little warmer, but you're going to have the airflow going through. So there are some different variables here on why you may want to go with a 2.5 over a 3.5. Even though you say you get 1 terabyte either drive, this might be a lot cheaper also. But this might be a quarter of the price more or $20 more, and you have to get the support bracket. Depending on your case, you may decide to lean more towards this than this because of this. You have more airflow. So these are some of those little tiny factors that go on between a 2.5 and a 3.5 drive. If you need the massive amount of storage, you're probably going to have to go with the older, bigger drive. But for most home users, I can't imagine anybody needing like a 36 terabyte drive for storage. I don't even use that. So to me, that is just kind of a crazy thing to even say this is something you need to consider. Yes, you might need it, you might want it. If you're doing photos or you're doing some other things, but you might not only have one drive in your system. A lot of systems support multiple bays for multiple things. Older systems that had CD-ROMs, you'd have 3 to 4 bays. Old cases I used to buy used to have 8, 10 bays for drives in them. The full towers that had multiple bays. Maybe you do a combination. Instead of having 2 of these drives on top of each other blocking all the airflow, you have one drive and one drive. Or even if you put the enclosure and you have a single bay where this drive's down lower, you can put one here and one on top, have 3 drives. And you have the airflow going across to keep this drive cool. So that's why a lot of case flow, airflow, a lot of those things come into play. That you have to go see the rabbit hole videos to explain some of these things. But that is where really you got to consider 2.5 to 3.5 style drives if you have the bays. Some cases only have the 2.5 drive bays. They're in the back, on the side. Some of them have where you have to put an enclosure or a certain mount, or you screw it to the front. There's different ways now that these things get mounted. Knowing that and understanding that, had a case where the drive mounts to the front panel. Holes were designed for 3.5 drive. So it was kind of interesting because I had a 2.5 drives. So what I had to do was put it in an enclosure and mount the enclosure because the holes don't line up right. The holes on here are the right size for the case. So that was the huge variable between the two, that you have to do one or the other. And that might be something that you run across and you go, oh, I have this and it don't line up and the holes are bigger. Well, that's because it's a 3.5, not a 2.5. Not knowing that is not something that goes, oh man, this is garbage, I can't use it. No, you just buy the enclosure. You can use the actual enclosure to mount it. So knowing those things will save you a lot of headaches and a lot of stress, and understanding that these are pretty much interchangeable in a certain way. This can be used in this space. You really can't use this in that space. So that's kind of some of the major variables there, is knowing what you can use and how you can use it. You can't put this into that smaller bay. But I'm sure they probably have some other enclosures are out there, or some other things, depending on your case. If the holes are designed for this, you can probably adapt it if there's the space to put that in there, if you need that massive storage. Or you just go with the smaller 2.5 drive. Odds are you probably won't be able to put that big of a drive in a space designed for that, because there's a lot of different variances here. It's not only the length, it's how deep it is too. The drives are completely kind of different. So you'd have to research that. And of course, if you have one of these laying around, you can check, will this actually fit in there? But again, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of people that need that kind of data storage size, unless you're doing a small business or you're doing something else, some graphics design or something where you really need that massive amount of size. And again, does it have to be internal? Or go back to the other videos and the video I just did about external case security, all of that stuff, the drive security. That's also one of the other factors that come into play that I always thought was interesting. Imagine the case where it mounts to the front. It's metal on the front. Knowing what drive you want to choose, because I told you about making sure this is safe. I didn't use a spinning mechanical. Use the SATA. Has the enclosure all the way around it. So I know you're not going to get static, dirt, dust, anything that might ground out any of these circuits in here to the case. So wanted to make sure I explained some of this, the versions of difference between 2.5, 3.5, how you can interchange it, where it's used, and how they're basically the same. It's really the size. Literally size. There's no difference between pretty much speeds and all of that stuff. Again, if you have a SATA 2 versus a SATA 3 drive, there's going to be a difference. But basically, if you have SATA 3 drives, they're basically the same. It's a SATA 3 drive, just the size, data transfer, all of that's the same. And again, size is physically the drive size and how much data is on, how large of a data you can save on that drive. And these can be pretty large. They're getting pretty large, but to me, I can't imagine too many people really out there wanting that. These are fairly large also. I don't know the exact specs for this video because, again, 2 terabytes is normally more than anybody ever needs for this kind of drive. Again, there's 4 terabytes and there's other things. I think 8 terabytes I know. And I think it goes a lot higher, but the price goes really high. Today, with drive speeds and operating systems and everything else, these are not really being used in my recommendations or anything that I'm working on. They're really not being used. Everything is pretty much going to these. 500 gig terabytes is what I'm using everywhere. So to even hold up this drive that's a 2 terabyte in the work I'm doing and stuff I'm doing and people that I help and all of that stuff, they're not using a 2 terabyte. If they do 2 terabyte, it's just because they want it so they don't have to worry about it for future use. Other thing with SATA drives, NVMe drives, it's recommended not to go past halfway full or 3/4 of the way. I always tell people, don't put more than half the size of your data on there. Yes, I know 500 gigs and you're cutting it down to 250 is kind of a lower mark, but that's basic what everybody kind of uses. Yeah, you go up to 300, yeah, okay, fine. 400 gigs should be fine. But the recommendation is don't go over halfway of your drive because the drive moves the data around to save the chips. So knowing that might vary on what size drive you want to buy. That really doesn't have to do with 2.5 or 3.5, except for if you're going with this to this and you're figured out, okay, I don't want the bigger drive, I want the smaller drive. What do I want at that point? And you're down to the 2.5. The slot you have is 2.5. What do you want? And again, I mentioned, this one will pretty much outperform this one anytime. So, those are some of the little factors you might want to consider. Because, really, this one might not even be a consideration except for data size and price. Most likely, most people will be comparing this to this. And that's where I see on a lot of basic reviews is this to this, or even that is pretty much the same. But this is really where the true comparison comes down to in knowing the two drives. The 2.5, 2.5, and the 3.5. So let me wrap this one up. Thank everybody for watching. And I hope this explains enough between the 3.5 drive and a 2.5 drive, and really the two variances between them, so that you can make a good logical decision and to know to watch the safety of those drives. To know how you're going to mount it might change that variable in the 2.5 between which kind of drive you want. But like I said, it's going to be pretty slim to have a different choice. And what I just did is another major factor. I dropped this. This is fine. No moving parts. Other drive has moving parts. If I dropped that, I probably would have damaged it. So, want to thank everybody for watching. Come back, watch all the other videos, because it's going to go more in depth of drives. Thank you so much.